Hello again everyone, and greetings to you all from Cambridge, England. In the past, I used to speak on the world's worst microscopy, believing that as the decades unwound, the standards of microscopy must inevitably improve, and examples of the world's worst would become harder and harder to find. Sadly, almost the opposite has happened. And so today, we're going to take a look at some of the world's best old microscopy and some of the world's worst new microscopy. If we step back to the dawn of microscopy, we'll encounter this man, Robert Hooke, born in 1632 and died in 1703. This is how he may have looked. We don't know if this is what Hooke would have looked like because, unusually, there is no oil painting of him surviving. It's believed that his great rival, Sir Isaac Newton, very odd and unpleasant character, had the portrait of Hooke destroyed as part of his campaign to prevent Hooke from ever having a leading part to play in the history of science. But Robert Hooke was an extremely clever man and, in essence, the world's first ever professional microscopist. He was paid as a technician, as we now say, at the Royal Society in London, and in that role he was commanded by the Society to bring forward some microscopical demonstrations at every one of their meetings. And the engravings of his studies remain remarkable sights to this day. Let's look, to start with, at one of the first drawings in his great book Micrographia, an engraving of cotton cloth. He did the drawings himself and supervised the engravings with meticulous care to make sure they were accurate. And look here at this picture of human hair. He was the first to realise that hair did have a form of layered, scaly structure. He also studied crystals, and I think he stole this idea from the Italian Bartolin, showed how the alignment of molecules could be related to the shape of the crystals that they formed. And sometime before he ever showed dead cells in cork, he showed these living cells in a beautiful engraving of Funaria, the wall-screw moss. And what about these seeds of the opium poppy, recognisable to all microscopists for their characteristic sculpturing on the surface, which Hooke portrayed with brilliant accuracy? His drawing of the skin of a sole, that almost looks, does it not, like a modern photograph, so accurate is his portrayal. He was the first person to look closely at the substructure of feathers, see how the barbules and the little hooks linked together, and attempted the science of feather structure for the very first time in scientific history. And finally, his detailed studies of flies. Here is the foot of a fly and a bit of the compound eye, figure 3 there on the bottom left. Yes, he was an extraordinarily clever man, and of course it was Robert Hooke who went on to inspire the great Dutch pioneer Antonie van Leeuwenhoek. Here he is, the only portrait of him, born in 1632, died in 1723. And he used to send voluminous and very vernacular letters to London, written in early modern Dutch, in a very characteristic casual style of his own. And his drawings that accompanied them, made by a limner, a kind of an artistic secretary that he brought in to draw the specimen that he had decided to display, these specimens really do have a vivid realism. Just look at the details on the antennae of that little fly. And what about rotifers? He didn't just show these microbes, these microscopic organisms, but he analysed the details, and he showed them with vivid accuracy. And if you want to talk about microscopical examination at the highest level, just look at Leeuwenhoek's drawing of muscle. There's a piece of teased muscle tissue at the top, but look underneath, because there is a drawing of a single striated muscle fibre, a voluntary muscle fibre. And look at it. There are the transverse striations that characterise this tissue, which now we all understand exist, but this was Leeuwenhoek doing it more than 300 years ago. Can you honestly imagine the cleverness, the ingenuity, the precision, and the diligence of that man? So these early microscopists were meticulous in the way they examined their microscopical specimens. Okay, let's come up to the modern day. Now, if you want to see microscopical research, you turn, of course, to YouTube, where everybody posts everything. And YouTube is filled with enthusiastic amateurs showing what they have seen through their microscopes.
Ooh, focus.
Geek Joan has presented these.
Oh. Here's a dude. Let's go in. Where did you go?
The standard of the image is, I'm afraid, not as good as it was hundreds of years ago.
You were here just seconds ago. Thought I saw another one. Let's back out again. Focus. And down. Ooh, that's a big one.
But this, of course, is an enthusiastic amateur, and one mustn't ever deny amateurs the chance to show their prowess. But if you want to see modern microscopy at its best, we have to turn, of course, to a professional site. A site where a producer has decided to make videos that have cost tens of thousands, possibly $100,000, has set up a proper microscope, a proper camera, a proper studio, a proper voice-over narrator, where it is cut, edited, produced, refined, the highest level of video professionalism. So let's go to MicroMagic. Now, this in fact is a pirated site, which has copied MicroMagic 6, the original site, because the TikTok subscriber was just so massively impressed at everything that you could see under the microscope. This, it was thought, this is a site worth copying, worth emulating. Tens of thousands of people have followed it. So let's take a look and see what they're going to show us.
Potatoes under the microscope.
Now wait, potato is a very good subject. Potato under the microscope gives you some wonderful, magnetic, captivating images. Under the electron microscope, you can get an idea of what you're going to be able to see. There are the cell walls. The cells are typically hexagonal, and within are those ovoid starch grains, characteristic of potato. I expect those MicroMagic 6 people are going to get an image like this, where you can see the cell walls and within the cells, the starch grains. Suppose you use a little ingenuity and look at those starch grains by dark ground. This is a picture taken by the eminent Canadian micrographer, Robert Hooke. Beautifully dark ground illuminated. I know in America you say dark field. It's not the field that's dark, it's the background that's dark, which is why I much prefer the English term dark ground. I hope you'll forgive me that indulgence. And of course you can play with these images too. Under crossed polars, that distinctive Maltese cross appearance emerges in each starch grain. And with Reinberg illumination adding a bit of colour, just look at the beauty that awaits you. Isn't that an extraordinary sight? I mean, that could be a textile design, a picture on a wall, an album cover. So let's go back and see what the MicroMagic 6 people make of their demonstration of the potato. We'll pick up where we left off.
Potatoes under the microscope.
Well, the section isn't quite as thin as one ordinarily might like. Leeuwenhoek cut his sections down to a couple of thousandths of an inch, and this is perhaps a quarter of an inch thick. And I must admit that what you see under the lens is not wildly exciting. That was quite a bit of a disappointment when first I saw it. Now, I know what you're thinking. They made a fundamental mistake. Every section should have a cover slip. And of course they use cover slips. Let's have a look at how they handled a section of ochre under the microscope. And you will see that, yes, cover slips certainly are used.
Okra under the microscope.
There we go. Cover slip in position. But when you think of the delicate intricacy of those cells, when you think of the wonderful outline that lies in wait for anybody studying the epidermis of these plant specimens, it is a little disappointing that MicroMagic 6 doesn't manage to show anybody anything at all of any interest. Anyway, let's go back to the potato and pick up and see where we go next. Perhaps the potato was just one bad example.
Avocado under the microscope.
It does have to be said that these are the most disappointing microscopic images I have ever seen in the whole of my life.
Dried mango under the microscope.
How is it that so much can be spent on establishing a setup and employing staff and getting all this done when nobody knows the first thing about preparing a specimen for the microscope?
Picture of jackfruit under the microscope. Potato chips under the microscope.
And why do they choose specimens that are specifically not of microscopical interest? Now, the next specimen in this series, as I was flicking up on the phone, was going to be meat. Now, meat is interesting under the microscope. If you look at striated muscle, you can see these delicately interlaced fibers. The cells in striated muscle fuse together to form these discrete muscle fibers. This is a picture taken at the University of Bristol, and if we look closely, you can quite clearly see the striations. You remember I showed how Leeuwenhoek had portrayed these back in the 1600s, and here, under a modern microscope, is what you see. So MicroMagic 6 are now going to take a sample of striated musculature and demonstrate that in all its glory to the viewing tens of thousands.
Steak under the microscope.
We don't see much striated muscle there, I'm afraid.
Nail polish under the microscope. Strawberries under the microscope. Cucumber under the microscope. Blush pink roses under the microscope. River water under the microscope.
Ah, river water. Now there's bound to be something of interest in river water. This they cannot get wrong. Nothing much. Ah, but here is a sign of life. Here we are, an insect. Sadly, nothing to do with the pond. That's a thrip that happens to have fallen into the water.
Tap water under the microscope.
Their sample of tap water has been slightly contaminated by a fibre or two.
Cherry soda under the microscope. Coffee under the microscope. Starfruit under a microscope. Bird's nest under the microscope. Asian clam under the microscope. Caviar under the microscope.
There is so much that the microscope can reveal, but you do have to prepare the specimen properly in the first place. Nobody in this team has the slightest idea what they're doing.
Beer under the microscope. LeBron's candy under the microscope.
And so this sorry cavalcade continues.
Tiny seashell under the microscope. Powdered drinks under the microscope. Laundry detergent under a microscope looks really fascinating. Sweet chili sauce under the microscope. Black pepper sauce under the microscope. Eggs under the microscope. Duke cherry under the microscope. Tomato sauce under the microscope. Pork liver under microscope. Would you still drink grape juice under a microscope, man? Bad banana under the microscope. Pumpkin under the microscope.
And that's where we must leave this sequence. However, they did have one demonstration which is always bursting with life. A specimen of semen, bubbling away with active sperm. This surely is going to be the pièce de résistance, the triumph of microscopical demonstration.
Sperm under the microscope.
No, not much to be seen there. Try higher magnification. Should see something at 100 times. Let's crank it up to 400. And so we leave the probably childless microscopist to his own devices. I find it extraordinary that the quality of microscopy could be so low, and that it hasn't dawned on anybody that if you cut a section, it's preferably much less than 1/4 of an inch thick if you really want to see anything of microscopical detail. Anyway, he couldn't see sperm, but let's go right back to where we started. Let's go back to the 1600s. Let's go back to Leeuwenhoek and his single-lens microscope. Here is a specimen with traces of post-coital spermatozoa actively making their way around. And yes, you can see them perfectly clearly with a single-lens microscope, the kind of microscope that Leeuwenhoek would have had centuries ago. The fact that a modern microscopist can fail even to demonstrate something so essentially elementary and easy to see is really quite extraordinary. The failure of this series actually boggles the mind. I won't say I'm left speechless, ladies and gentlemen. It would take more than that to render me devoid of words. But the fact remains that the standard of microscopy in this appalling series is by far the worst that any of us have ever seen in all our lives, in any laboratory, anywhere in the entire whole wide world. I am stunned to think that tens of thousands of people now think that that's what things look like under the microscope. Can one sue the perpetrators for misrepresentation? Can we take action against them for defamation? Can we try and launch a national campaign to protest against this callow, this appalling misuse of our beloved science? No, what we can do is just show it and smile and chuckle, and then go and pour ourselves a stiff drink and be so glad that no matter how bad our microscopy might be when we're in an off day, it's never, ever going to be quite as bad as that.